what is democracy? We live in a democratic country, right? What is the distinction between monarchy and democracy? What is democracy? Can monarchy be democratic? Monarchy can be democratic, all right? So what is democracy? Let's begin with that question. Do you think there is democracy in India? What is when you say by the people, what does it mean? Does it mean all the people in India go to the parliament and make decisions? Okay, so democracy is a system in which you choose representatives and they make the decisions, right? So that means it's a system of voting, right? You're saying, let me write that down so that we understand what it means. Right? Okay, that's the kind of standard definition that you will find in books. Imagine the following scenario. There is a family, an extended family, let's say about 25 people. And that family decides who you're going to elect. That family, every 5 years, that family sort of sits together and say, okay, who is going to stand for election? And they say, okay, you guys, 5 people. All right? And then these 5 people stand, and you can stand for election. You can vote. Select one of these 5. That person becomes the king. And for 5 years, this king rules. At the end of that person's rules, this family sits together again and say, okay, let's get 5 more people now, and you select. Is that democracy? According to your definition, that is democracy, right? According to your definition, the situation that I described is democracy. All right?
So on the basis of voting of all the population of the kingdom, which is, the country, which is the country, of all the population of the country, above 18.
You mean everybody stands for election?
No. Voting by the people.
Yeah. The system that I described, everybody votes. But you select from these 5.
But anyone can be one of those 5. So
Pardon me?
anyone who wants to be the king can be one of those 5.
So you have to change the definition. Because your definition doesn't specify who can stand for election.
Representation is voluntary.
Representation is voluntary. What do you mean?
The one who wants to stand for election is voluntary. No one can force anyone.
Okay, so but change your definition. Change your definition then. How do I define democracy such that the situation that I described is not democracy? Notice I'm using a particular technique of conceptual inquiry. I'm going to ask you for a definition, then I'm going to confront you with a scenario and a thought experiment, and then I'm going to ask you, is this democracy? And then you say, no, it is not. Then I'm saying, okay, in that case, change your definition. The point I'm making is this. When I gave you the scenario, you said it is not democracy. But your definition fits that scenario. So you cannot say, no, it is not democracy until you change the definition. Then you can say, no, it is not, because from my definition, it follows that the scenario is not that of democracy. So change the definition. Let me give you one more example, okay? There is a country in which there is a mafia, total criminals, okay? They have all the guns and they have all the power. And the mafia is something like 500 people, or let's say 1,000 people. And the mafia puts up people for election. You can choose a murderer and a rapist, between a murderer and a rapist, right? Or something else, or just an ordinary thief, whatever, or somebody who takes bribes. Is that democracy? No. Okay. Scenario number 3. There are 2 opposing mafias, and each mafia sets up their criminals. Is that democracy? No. There are 5 mafias, and each mafia puts up people for election. Is that democracy? My final question. There are 5 political parties. Is that democracy? 5 political parties, each party puts up a few people and you elect from these people. Is that democracy? Does India have democracy? Okay, so this is our first definition. Here is another definition. A system, democracy is a system, doesn't have to be government, a system in which everyone who is affected by a decision has an opportunity to influence the decision. So let me describe an actual scenario, real life case. When I teach a course, I allow students to make decisions on the syllabus. I allow students to make decisions on the deadline. I give an assignment and I ask my students, when do you want to have the deadline? When I do a topic, I ask my students, what topic would you like to have next? All right? So there are many decisions that students make. In that system, the way I teach, is that a democratic system? According to that definition, it's a democratic system. There is a monarch, king, but the king asks people, what law do you want? And the people, okay, discuss and make decisions and tell the monarch. And monarch says, okay, if this is your collective decision, I go by that. Right? Is that a democratic system? According to the first one, not according to the second one. Now let me ask you the question. Does India have democracy?
No. Not sure.
Second question. How can we evolve? Is democracy a good thing?
Yes.
Yes.
True democracy.
Not the voting system. Voting system is meaningless. I mean, it may be one possible way to get democracy, but that is not sufficient. Obviously, we have voting, but not democracy. How can we evolve? How can we evolve? How can we grow towards a democratic country by the time you are 30 years old? Or by the time you're 60 years old? Or by the time your grandchildren are old enough, to do whatever they want to do? How can we move towards that system? Okay? That question that I'm asking you is a question of conceptual inquiry. All these questions that I've been asking, whether it's about democracy, whether it's about straight lines and circles, or whether it's about chemical reactions, or facts and opinions, these are questions of conceptual inquiry. Notice that all of them are what questions. But this is not a question about what is this? That's a piece of chalk. That is not a conceptual inquiry question. What is democracy? What is knowledge? What is science? What is a straight line? These are not questions about vocabulary, these are questions about concepts. That's why they are conceptual inquiry questions. These questions cut across all boundaries. From mathematics to physics to science to biology to psychology to politics to morality. When you ask a question like, what is fairness? Is capital punishment, is it a good thing? Is it morally right to have a law which prohibits suicide? Notice that according to our law, suicide is illegal. So what that means is, if I commit suicide, if I'm successful in committing suicide, no law can touch me. But if I fail, they'll put me in prison. So once I wrote an article, I wrote it and sent it to a newspaper, they wouldn't publish it. I said, I strongly support this law. So if anybody fails, if anybody attempts to commit suicide and fails, capital punishment is the punishment for them. Is capital punishment bad? Capital punishment is death penalty. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. So let me repeat what I said in my article. If anybody tries to commit suicide and is unsuccessful, put that person to death. That should be the legal punishment.
So it means anybody who tries to suicide is going to die.
No. There are people who are unsuccessful. So you punish them.
So that's not the thing. According to
If
law, if they are unsuccessful, they are going to get death
But look, death penalty is a punishment, right? So all that I'm saying is, legally, the punishment for failure of committing suicide is death, right? The question that I want you to consider is it for the government to decide what you should do with your life, or is it your decision? In which case, is a law that forbids suicide, is that a moral law? That's the question I'm asking you. In the United States, until 1956 or 60, there were many states that legally prohibited marriage between different races. So if a white person married a Chinese person or a white person married a black person, they will be put in prison. Laws can be immoral. I'm asking you the question about the legal prohibition of suicide. Is that a moral law? Euthanasia is I don't know, it's illegal today in India, right? You know what euthanasia is? Mercy killing. Is the legal prohibition of law moral or immoral? How old are you guys? 14, 15? Someday you will become 25, right? When you become 25, it's very important. You will be an educator. You will have your higher degrees and you will have master's degrees. Some of you will have PhDs. Some of you will be doing your PhD, etc. Or some of you will be professionals. You should have the capacity to ask these questions, address these questions. Taking the exams and getting marks is not sufficient for being educated. Being educated means the ability to think for yourself and look for answers to questions of this kind. If you want to be a responsible citizen in any country, you should be able to investigate questions like and debate on questions like, should suicide be regarded as illegal? Is death penalty moral? Should we prohibit abortion? At what time? Right? And so on. So that is where you have to be 10 years from now. You should have that capacity, and the only way you can have that capacity is for you to work towards that capacity. We can't give it to you. You have to develop it. And conceptual inquiry and all these other forms of inquiry are all interconnected, and they will all give you some ability to become educated. We can't make you educated. You have to become educated yourself. We can only help you a little bit. We began conceptual inquiry with questions like, what are parallel lines? What are straight lines? What are lines? And what's the relation between lines and points? These are examples of conceptual inquiry in mathematics. We learned two things from this enterprise. One, there are concepts that we think we know, we understand clearly, but we actually don't. At least we don't understand them with sufficient clarity. Two, by investigating these concepts, by recognizing our ignorance and investigating these concepts, we can improve our understanding. The way we do this is by defining the concepts clearly, pursuing the logical consequences of the definition, and checking if those consequences match our judgments on examples. So we define parallel lines and take some examples and check if the consequence of defining parallel lines in a certain way would match our judgment on the particular examples of lines that we regard as parallel or not parallel. We then moved on to conceptual inquiry in political philosophy by asking the question, what is democracy? We pursued the same strategy. We came up with definitions of democracy, looked at scenarios that we would judge to be democratic or not democratic, and checked if the logical consequences of our definitions matched our judgments or not. Whether it is math, science, or philosophy, if the logical consequences of our definitions do not match our judgments on the examples, we have two options. One, we can change the definition so that the logical consequence of the new definition matches our judgment. The other option is to change our judgment. The only requirement is that the logical consequences are not inconsistent with our judgments and they correctly predict our judgments.